Welcome everyone, we're so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and joining us for another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast with your hosts Steve Hodgson and Dr. Eric L. Davis. Welcome to the Your Life Matters Show podcast. We ask that you please note that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and does not constitute medical advice. It is essential to consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, and any actions taken based on the information presented are at your own risk. We are so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and join us for a brand new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Let's watch what this evening's podcast is all about.
This evening, we will continue to explore the mind and the mysteries of paranormal activity. Is it real, or is it just your overactive imagination? Are you really seeing apparitions, or is your mind dealing with other major mental health issues? Last week, your hosts discussed the mental health aspects of people's belief in the paranormal and how they shape your experiences. Tonight, we pick up the discussion right where we left off last episode, where Dr. Davis begins to interview his co-host, Steve Hodgson. Steve is a 49-year paranormal veteran investigator in the field of paranormal research. He has written 2 books on the subject, as well as finishing off his 3rd and final book in the series, The Paranormal Not as Seen on TV. Having investigated since he was 17 years old and performing hundreds of investigations for both private homes as well as public businesses, he will share online for the first time evidence he has captured during his many investigations with his paranormal group, Professional Paranormal Investigations. Be prepared for the stories, the photos, the audio, and the video they have captured and present this evening. Sit back, grab your blanket to hide under, or hold on to your favorite teddy bear and watch as Steve brings you along as they explore the unknown. Let's get right back into the discussion.
All I'm going to do is, just so I'm a little different, I'll put on my Professional Paranormal Investigations hat. Well, if I can see it there. There we go. Okay. Exploring the unknown on. And feels weird wearing a hat when you have no hair.
I agree.
I'm not sorry, I'm not used to that. Okay. So I'm now a guest.
All right.
And now for something completely different.
How did you initially get involved in paranormal investigating?
Well, as I said earlier, we had the incident with my grandmother that had taken place, that was always in my head when I was younger. But when I was a child, I used to volunteer at a Catholic church, St. Anthony in Padua, it's still down in Manhattan. And I had keys to everything, the gym, to the school. I mean, I was actually a church organist for a while. Okay, I filled in as a church organist. And I used to go in, my band would rehearse there and stuff, and I'd go in and actually practice on the piano in the church hall when nobody was there. I had keys, there was one little light that would turn on over in the hall over the piano, and I'd sit and play. And basically I was playing more rock tunes than anything else because, I was teaching myself all this stuff. And the only lesson I had, which a sidetrack half a second, was when I was a little kid, they sent me to the convent that was there for piano lessons from a Sister Stella. I still never forget her name.
Yeah.
And they put us all in these little rooms that had a little upright piano in. And she said she would be back, and put each child into a room. So I started playing around on the piano. I think I was probably 6 years old. And she came back in and I said, hold on, I want to show you something. And she goes, what? And I started playing Hello, Dolly. Okay, remember I was a child back in, the 60s and stuff. And she said to me, you got to leave. And I remember getting really, really upset and saying, what do you mean I have to leave? And she said, no, you have to go. And she called my parents. And I was like, oh, God, my dad's going to kill me. What do they do now, you know? And I remember my mom asking her, what did he do wrong? And she said, he didn't do anything wrong. She says, but he's got a talent. And he's figured out stuff on his own. And I don't want to teach him my style. Let him develop his own style. And I never forgot that. And yes, I did. Over all the years, even playing bass and stuff like that, I had my own style of playing. So anyway, I'm playing in this hall, and the name of the hall was the Pop Mazzanti Hall. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm sitting there playing, and here comes Pop walking through the hall, and comes walking like a couple of rows over. We set up for bingo, so there was rows of tables and chairs. And I said, "Hey, Pop," and he smiled, nodded his head, and kept walking. So I kept playing, and after about 10 seconds, I stopped playing. And I was like, "Pop died 2 years ago." Now, I had been so many years working for the church. I mean, I had seen Pop walk back and forth when he was alive and stuff, so I didn't think anything of him when I first saw him. But he had actually passed. And I turned back and looked, and he was gone. There was nobody there. There's no place to go. Okay. And I even went back and looked. There was a room where the priests used to do their laundry and stuff. There was nobody in there. Nothing. He was gone. I was like, okay, that's really weird because I know what I saw. Okay. And saw him walk by there. And it was probably a week or two later. I was heading down. I said my band used to rehearse there. We had a room down in the basement where we stored our drums, our amps, and stuff. And we used to just carry it up this little flight of stairs into the hole.
Yeah.
And I'm going down this, going and I open the door, and the lights are on going down to the basement. I was like, oh, okay, somebody must be down here, and I could hear noise, inside one of the rooms. Now, when you went down, the boiler was right there to the right, and to the left there was a little hallway. Okay, to the right there was a room that was locked. That was the pantry where they kept food. Okay, they had to lock it up for whatever reasons. Okay, across the hall from that, there was a workshop. The maintenance guys had workshop in there, and then the next thing down next to that was our room that we kept everything. Okay. Well, I get down there and the light's on in the workshop. And I go into the workshop. As soon as I turn the wall, it got dead silent. The tools were out. I mean, out of the cabinet and everything. There was nobody in there. Now, nobody could have come out because they would have had to pass me in that hallway. It was a little hallway. There was nobody down there at all. But all the stuff was out. And I know I heard noises, like hammering and everything else that was going on. From that point forward, I turned off all the lights going down and sat in the room next door with my trusty flashlight in hand, turned off all the lights and would sit in there and would wait till I hear something. And you would hear, stuff in, I'm not talking about the boiler turning on and off, but you would hear tools and stuff. And I'd get up, my flashlight, run into the other room, and there'd be nobody in there. So I always say, when people say, well, how'd you start investigating? I started investigating, and I was only 17 years old.
Wow.
And I started doing that, and I knew there was something else at that point. I mean, there was no question in my mind. I mean, I hadn't done any kind of drugs. I wasn't into drinking back then or anything.
Yeah, that's something I probably should have mentioned earlier. Like, how do you know if it's legit or not? Well, if you're doing a bunch of drugs, then that may not be paranormal.
Yeah, you might be a little paranoid, okay, over what the sounds are. But there was something that was there, and I kept investigating what it was that was there. Over and over again, I kept looking to find what was there. And I always had that in my head when I walked around the place. I mean, I found out years later that the priests used to experience the same thing.
Wow.
Down in that basement. It took years before somebody would admit to me what was going on there. Okay, but one of the brothers who I knew went down there a lot told me, he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "many times." He says, "I'd hear noises, and I would even say on the way down, not to scare somebody, say on my way down, brother Pat, and he
Yeah.
says, and I get there, and there's nobody there, and he says, there's no place they could go, there's no way out of there except through me." And I said, "Well,
Yeah.
they may have gone through you, and you just didn't feel it." But it's happened to other people, and of course, as Catholic priests, they probably didn't want to talk about the
Yeah.
stuff that went on there. And I've seen different things in that church and experienced so many things in my years that were there. That was enough for me to believe that there was something else in the paranormal there. And just, I always never turned that off. I always kept looking for more signs of that, even when I started at home and everything else, you kept your mind open and looking for things.
Yeah.
So,
Well, here's one of the questions that I have. Can you just like give us a brief rundown of like, what the typical paranormal investigation tools are that people
okay.
use? So that, I know that there's uh, dowsing rods and EVP and all those
Okay.
sorts of things.
Well, I always start off by telling people some of that stuff is expensive. And it's actually kind of interesting that if you look on the product label or something, it says for entertainment only, which I find very interesting.
Hmm.
But we all have two of the most important tools, and that's our eyes and our ears. Okay, because while you're looking down at that box going on, you can have a full body apparition walk right in front of you, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't see it because you're too busy looking down at that piece of equipment that's there. Okay, that being said, with some of the things we have, obviously video cameras were very important. For the longest time, we had the DVR type cameras the old security cameras that all went into a central little box, and you had the little screen display where you could watch and stuff that went on there, and they were nice. And you'll actually see when I'm showing back some of the evidence, one of those that we had there. We had a 4-channel one, and we had an 8-channel, then we had a 16-channel, and then we went digital after that, which was really nice because you'd have to run wires all over the place.
Yeah.
After that, but then there's audio recorders, cassette recorders, or digital recorders.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't, most people don't realize it doesn't make a difference. They've had cassette tapes completely wrapped up, brand new, never even opened,
Mhm.
inside of a room, okay, for an entire investigation. And after the investigation was over, they went back, opened the tape up now, took the wrapper off of it, opened it up, and played and found EVPs on it.
Wow.
Okay, so you don't need the recorder and stuff for them to communicate with you. Digital recorders are really nice because you don't have the reels and stuff to listen to. You can just copy the electronic file off. And the good thing is it makes it real easy to make the stuff louder, clean it up. Because there's a lot of times when we sit back and listen to something, we're like, what was that? Did I hear something? And you go back and you isolate it. You
Yeah.
take that piece out, you try to clean up all the noise behind it, and you put it up louder, and then you hear a homeowner say, "Man, I gotta pee." Okay, and it's like, I just spent 20 minutes, okay, cleaning this up to hear you say that. So we always used to tell people, listen, if you got something to say it out loud. It's no big deal. You're not interrupting me and stuff, even if I'm in the middle of talking. Don't whisper something because you're whispering something when we go back and listen to it, we're going to think
Yeah.
it's a spirit or something whispering. And you're going to hear some of that whispering that makes, a little hard to hear. There were some interesting boxes. There's they have all ITC, which I don't even remember what it stands for, but they had a series of products out. One of them was the Avalos. Thank you. I had to think about
Okay.
that for a second. The Avalos 3, 4, and 5. Actually, number 5 came out. Actually, had a digital screen on it.
Oh, wow.
So the words that it was saying would come up onto the screen, which helps because sometimes you're not sure what the obelisk was saying. Those were all cute, I use those more for proximity things because it had something on it that if you
Yeah.
went near it, the thing would just ping. Like, it almost sounded like an ocean void,
Uh,
submarine ping. But it's interesting because if you have it in another room and nobody's in that room and the thing starts pinging, okay,
yeah.
what's going on inside that room? Okay,
Right.
something's in there that's doing that. They don't have a cat or anything, there's something going on in that other room. Plus, there are times you can help that can help you communicate. You can tell it you ping once for yes and twice for no. And you start asking questions, are you a male? You're female. Have you ever been of this earth? Because sometimes spirits, if they're evil, maybe never walked the earth
Yeah.
prior to that. But there's a thing called Phasma Box, PHASMABOX. It's a computer program that you put on your laptop or your iPad. Okay, it doesn't work on your computer. For some reason, it only works on those.
Okay.
Now, it does scan the internet for sound like some of these ghost boxes that you see. I
Yeah.
personally am not a fan of the ghost boxes because all you're hearing is, they
Yeah.
hear a word every
Yeah.
once in a while. Okay, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I get it can manipulate that to get the words you want, but no. This Phasma box, you could turn off the internet
Okay.
to it so that whatever words are coming through, it's not a dictionary. Whatever comes through comes through.
So
And
is it, I was just going to ask you, so is that app like it, so that's an app that you can get for iOS, it sounds like.
right,
Is that an app that you would recommend for anybody listening that is just interested in experimenting with paranormal investigating?
yes and no.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Now I've been in this a really long time. And one of our investigators, one of my close friends there, Elvin Potter, and he was going to be on with us today, but his job actually got him doing some stuff. He came with it to one investigation and it was at Pottstown School in Ohio. And, we used to do the website for them so we could investigate there whenever we
Yeah.
wanted. And Jen and I were leaving the next morning, like at 10 o'clock the next morning. We had a flight to Florida for vacation.
Yeah.
And we investigated till like 3, 4 in the morning. And then from there, drove to Cincinnati Airport, which is like a 10-minute drive, parked the cars and stuff, and went for, waited for a flight. We had
Yeah.
breakfast. And so by the time I got to Florida, let's put it this way, I'd been up for like 40 something straight hours and I was ready to
Wow.
go to sleep. It really was. But at this investigation, he brought this Phasma box. Now, how can you say after a while when you're doing this for 40 something years, you start to lose a little bit of the spark to it? You're still interested in it, still got you, but it was like, really, come on, enough already. This Phasma box that night literally blew my mind. Okay. Jen had just lost an instructor. He was actually a shaman in real life, in the life and stuff. And he was teaching classes on meditation and all that stuff. His name
Yeah.
was Chris. And I knew Chris from just like Zoom sessions.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it was and I'd stop, hey, Chris, how are you? Hey, Steve, how are you doing? Okay, great. So Elvin and I are in one room, and Shauna, Elvin's wife, and Jen are down the hall. And this thing starts talking, and it says Elvin's name. Okay. You can think, well, there's a dictionary built into it somewhere. Okay, Elvin isn't the name that's going to be in your dictionary. Even
Yeah.
Shauna, okay, is another
I've
name.
only met one Elvin in my life that I know of.
Right, there you go. I had met none before him, okay? Even Shauna for that matter. But at one point, Chris's voice comes through and says, Jen?
Mhm.
And Elvin and I were just looking at each other, and I'm thinking to myself, that sounded just like Chris. Okay, and I look up, and Jen comes walking into the room, white as a ghost. The jaw had dropped. She goes, "Was that Chris?" And I was like, "That's what I thought. That
Yeah.
was Chris." Okay. And came through. Now, it said everyone's name, Jen, Sean, and Elvin. It would not say my name that night, but it would answer questions like how many spirits are here. It would say three,
Mhm.
and in different voices. It was the wildest stuff I had seen in years. Okay, it really
Yeah.
was. Um, we went to Florida, as I said. Now that next morning, Elvin was on his way to work, and there was rain and stuff, and somebody stepped out in front of his car that he drove right through, whatever was there. And he stopped right away. He got out because he thought he hit somebody. There was
Yeah.
nobody there. It was like 6 in the morning. Okay, he opened his Wendy's. And there was no one there. He even called his wife and was telling her what happened because he was, I mean, flustered over what he had seen. Um, we got to Florida and we went right to sleep once we got there. Okay, I mean, we it was in an Airbnb. The woman showed us the thing, and she said, "So what are you guys doing today?" I was like, "Going to sleep. Thank you. See you later," because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really needed to go to sleep. And during the night when we were sleeping, I heard someone I thought opened the front door to the house. So I got up, ran to the doorway, and I was going to go inside. I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I don't have my gun. My gun is, at home in Indiana. Okay, what am I doing here? Okay, but I slowly went out inside the living room. There was nobody there.
Yeah.
Okay, and it had rained and stuff. And I looked outside. There were no footprints, nothing. Nobody had been outside. And I was like, that's really weird. And then that night, while I was sleeping, I felt myself being pulled off the bed.
Mhm.
Okay, I was sleeping the opposite way because it's a big room and the AC wasn't really that good, but the AC was down there. So I caught more of the AC laying the other way. And I literally felt like someone was pushing my shoulders back off the side of
Wow.
the bed. I mean, I woke up, I was like, what the heck? Okay, and went back to sleep. In the morning, I told her about what had happened. She says, oh, yeah. She says, I want to tell you that there were two guys standing by the foot of the bed by you. And they were
What?
doing something. There was two figures that were sitting there trying to push me over the bed. And God knows what I would have fallen into, if they had succeeded in on that.
Yeah.
That was from that box. Now we got back from Florida. It was about a week and a half or 2 weeks later. We did a place called South Pittsburgh Hospital, which is actually in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a place called South Pittsburgh in Tennessee. Um, one of the most haunted places I have ever been to. Okay, we will go back to that.
Okay.
I've talked to Elvin about that, and said we need to go back. And I got some evidence from there I'll be showing you too.
Okay.
In that place, it did not want to say anyone else's name but me. Okay, and it was not being nice.
Wow.
And I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube here, but it was calling me an F and C
Oh, wow.
coming through. I mean,
Really?
now that's not radio signal because there's no radio.
Mhm.
The FCC is going to allow that to happen
Yeah.
on the air and stuff. And it called me, the P word from a cat, okay, and everything.
Yep.
I mean, really, we were like,
Yeah.
what is with this thing? Okay. So that box is interesting. I'll tell you other stories about it later because we're just on that.
Yeah.
But in all of the stuff, if you're not going to use, you should have a recorder, should at least one camera, even if you strap a GoPro on your head. Okay, and
Yeah.
I'm taking this off too because it's making me sweat. But if you put a GoPro across your head and stuff, that's good enough. You can walk around with that GoPro,
Yeah.
and you at least can visually go back if you do see something and you want to be able to prove it. that's
Yeah.
there. Now, you talked about dowsing rods.
Yeah.
Dowsing rods are great to find water, okay? But you have to know how to use a dowsing rod. And my wife was very good at, she would literally hold the dowsing rods and she would say, show me where Steve is.
Yeah.
And these things would point right at me. Show where Elvin is, and it would point to the other side, at Elvin. And she was, you're watching it. All she's just doing is holding the thing there. It's moving on its own.
Yeah.
But we did an investigation at a house. The daughter actually should have been a patient of yours.
Okay.
Okay, a little bit, but the mom was there. But there was stuff actually going on in the residence. And the mom and the aunt was there. And at one point, with the dowsing rods, she took off her cross, a crucifix she was wearing, and put it right up against the dowsing rod. Eric, these flashes of blue lights started shooting out of these dowsing rods.
What?
Yeah, it was absolutely what, and I know I sat there and watched it happening, and she stood there and watched it happening. Okay, and they were a
Yeah.
little into, I'm not going to say the occult, as far as to make it sound like, they were bad. They were witches, but they were good
Yeah.
witches. The
Yeah.
good, not the wicked witch from the West, but Glenda.
Right.
But no, they were actually good witches on that. And that home, too, I remember we were trying, there was a train wreck that happened on the property. And there were 6 or 7 people that were still stuck there that never crossed over. They were afraid to cross over into the light.
Mhm.
And we were going to try to cross them over together.
Yeah.
Now, it was in a dark room. When I closed my eyes, okay, I could see the figures of the people. And we told it to go towards the light. Told them to go towards the light. Well, all of a sudden that light hit. It burned my eyes so bad I had to open my eyes into the dark. I
Wow.
could not close my eyes because if I closed my eyes, that big, bright, harsh light was actually hurting my eyes. And it was not me that saw it. It was Jen. It was, I think, your brother Adam
Mhm.
was with us. And the people that were in the room all saw the same thing when they closed their eyes. You're not allowed to look up, they always say, into the light. Okay, if
Yeah.
he's still on this planet. And I personally think that's what happened that was there. And when they went into the light went off.
Wow.
And you could again now close your eyes and it wasn't that burning light that was there. So yeah,
That's amazing.
I've seen some things that just every once in a while I'd be sitting around and something will spark my memory like you just did about
Yeah.
dowsing rods and
Yeah.
I just think back, it's like I saw that.
I'm sure
I actually was sitting there and I experienced that, and that's absolutely amazing.
I'm sure you've seen some absolutely, wild things. What would you say is the scariest thing you've ever seen? I know that's a pretty pointed
Well,
question.
I try not to be scared. We talked about this earlier this morning that, you know, fear is like fire, and fear is like throwing gasoline on that fire. Okay. If there's something there, let's say that's evil, okay, and they want that fear because when you're in fear, you're not in control.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have that confidence and control if you're afraid. Um, as I was telling you, I made that mistake once. Okay, early on, there was a hospital um, in Indiana. I don't even want to say what it was. It was an old hospital, and when I show you the evidence that was there, something had happened, and we went back that night when we did the investigation, and I went, they were trying to debunk the image, and I didn't need to debunk it. I was there. I saw what happened. I knew what happened. So I started walking down the hallway. There was a big room next to it, which was the boiler room. And as I got to the doorway, every hair on my body stood up. And I actually had hair then, folks. Okay, I actually had a
Yeah.
full head of hair. Okay, and every
That was
hair
a
stood
long
up.
time ago. I'm just teasing you.
No, actually 2 years ago. Okay, I only cut it here in Florida. It was too hot. Um, and what did I refused to go into the room. In fact, I was petrified to go into that room by myself
Yeah.
because I knew, and don't ask me how I knew, but I knew whatever was in there was going to attack me if I went in there by myself. So smart Steve stepped a step back and yelled down the hallway to a few of the investigators to come here. They're like, what? I was like, just hush and come here.
Yeah.
Okay, they came here. I was like, I want you to go into this room with me. They're like, why? I was like, just shut up and go into the room. Because I didn't want to tell them why, because then you're, putting that into their heads.
Yeah.
And we went into the room and it was still there, whatever was there. I mean, you could feel its presence, but it would not attack me because there were two other people in the room. Okay. And they all felt, and especially one who never felt anything really, felt that presence inside the room. It was strong, whatever was there. And then poof, it was gone that quick because we didn't flinch by it. And I learned a lesson that night, never to be afraid of what's there. And later on, probably some investigations a couple of years down the line, Jen, myself, and two other investigators, Missy and Terry from Columbus,
Uh-huh.
we were at this house in Indianapolis. Yeah, and it really was Indianapolis. And they had been having some bad stuff going on, but they also visited this abandoned like shed and stuff, and
Yeah.
they used to see all these orbs flying out of it. I mean, some really bad things happening in there. And it's like, well, so why do you keep going back? you know, but
Yeah.
they would go back to it. So I think they brought something back to the home. And they had a little child that was there too. And the parents slept down the basement. They had a bed down in the basement, a little bathroom and stuff, and the child slept on the main floor, had his own room. And we were sitting down the basement, and this black entity, dark entity, and I'll go into that a little more in a few minutes. Anyway, it came and stood in the dark right in front of my face.
Man.
I mean, I could feel like breathing right in my face.
Yeah.
Okay. And I didn't flinch. I was like, I literally was, you're trying to scare me. It ain't going to work. So I went around the side of the bed where Jen was sitting because she was like sitting next to me, but faced the other way. And it did the
Yeah.
same thing to her. And she says, you're wasting your time with me. All of a sudden, this thing went literally ballistic. Upstairs, there was stuff, mirrors falling off of walls. There were lamps being knocked over, banging, and all this stuff being thrown all over the place upstairs. And
Yeah.
in the kids' room, in the closet, child wasn't there. In the kids' room, in the closet, which was the other side of the house, is a little child's voice that was saying, "Do it again, do it again," to this thing that was, you could hear everything
Yeah.
happening in the background. So I got on to, I don't fear anything. Okay. I'm getting older. I fear, I may not be able to protect myself as well
Yeah.
as I could when years ago, but I don't fear it. I think my faith has a lot. I used to wear the crucifix, Italian. Okay. I used to wear crucifix around my neck. And everybody at investigations, homeowners used to say, okay, you're not afraid because of the crucifix. And I say, that's a piece of jewelry.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not afraid because of my faith. And I remember even saying to those people when they asked that question, we were sitting upstairs in the living room, and I said it was my faith. I was like, you see that book? Because I always looked when I got to people's houses. And there's a Bible. You usually find
Yeah.
the Bible somewhere in the house. And this thing had dust on it that it hadn't been dusted off in years. Says a lot about a house cleaning too, but hadn't been dusted off in years. I said, you see the book over there in the corner that has dust all over it? She goes, well, it's the Bible over there. She goes, yeah. I said, well, you told me in the morning at like 6 o'clock, you have to turn up the TV in the morning so you don't hear the voices that
Yeah.
are inside talking to you. And I have no doubt that there were voices talking to them. Okay, after all the stuff I saw in that house, at that point, I had
Yeah.
zero doubts. I was like, instead of that, I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you grab the Bible, just open it up randomly, any place, and start reading some of the verses aloud. And she looked at me and she goes, why? I said, because evil does not want to be in a place where you have that much faith and your belief in
Yeah.
God. It will easily go somewhere else. And we've seen it where they pick on handicapped people and stuff, or weak-minded people. I think
Yeah.
we joked around about that earlier today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weak-minded people, but it's so much easier for them to take possession of them than it
Yeah.
is, for someone who's a stout believer. And I remember I said to her, you know, what should she said, what should I do? I was like, well, number one, I said, do you know of a minister, like a local minister? She goes, well, her uncle, I think, was a minister. I was like, well, cool. Okay, he's here, right, in town
Yeah.
she's at. I was like, ask him to come over and bless the house. She said, I did. And he said, no. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that ain't too good of a minister. Until
Yeah.
she gave the next part of that answer, was he said, bless it yourself. It's not
Okay.
my house. He said, so whatever's here will go sit in the corner until I leave. But unless you tell it
Yeah.
to leave and bless the house, it's going to be here. And I was like, wow, I need to remember that one because that
Yeah.
was a really, really good one and stuff. So, then I told her, I was like, maybe you should start going to church on Sunday morning.
Mhm.
I said, bring your kid. That's the important
Yeah.
thing. You want to protect your home. That's how you protect your home.
Okay.
So, people that are afraid of the paranormal, yeah, I get it. Some people, there are some, for the longest time, people are telling me I believe that everything that was there was evil. No, sorry, you're wrong, okay?
Yeah.
Just because I talked about evil doesn't mean I believed everything was evil. There
Right.
is evil. There is some really evil stuff. That thing that stood in front of my face and stood in front of Jen's face was evil. That
Yeah.
thing at the hospital that I saw that black shadow and stuff that was there was a janitor that when they were after the hospital closed, they had opened it like a travel agency in the front
Yeah.
stuff in one of the rooms. Even a hairstylist salon was even
Man.
open out, and they were trying to rent it out to make some money.
Yeah.
And there was a maintenance guy who was going through the hallways, and he had a little like one of those razor blade things, trying to pick up like gum off the floor and stuff.
Yeah.
And he was bent over doing this, and that razor blade jumped up and hit him in the skull.
Oh no.
She said the next thing she saw, because she had her office at the front there, was this man hauling butt out the front
Oh, I
door.
bet. I bet.
Okay. And she said, what's wrong? And she looked and he was bleeding. And it's like, what? He says, I'm sorry. I'm out of here. Goodbye. Quit. Fine. Ran out to his car and he left all his tools there and refused to even go back for his tools. He didn't want them. Okay.
Uh,
Because of what was inside that building. So I know what was there was evil. I've seen a lot of the things that it did, and it's the only time I've ever heard an entity growl. I mean,
wow.
like you have a dog, a big pit bull next to you
Mhm.
growling. I mean, this thing used to growl all the time. So yeah,
Great.
don't be fearful of it. You have to really stay within your faith of it. But yeah, don't fear it because the more you fear it, the more it's going to mess with you.
Okay. It's good to know.
Yeah. It's like even what you saw there, in your house, okay?
Yeah.
And you did the right thing. You didn't fear it. Say, oh my God, we got to move out of this house and
Yeah.
everything else. What you have to remember, even if it's a residual energy that's still there inside the house, okay, it's your house.
Yeah.
Like people always say, it started when I started doing renovations. in the
Yep.
house. Yeah, because they don't want you changing their house.
Yeah.
But you have to remind them that you're past, you're dead.
Yeah.
It's my house now.
Yeah.
Okay. And you may be crazy talking to a room. And trust me, I'm 66 years old. There was times when I was close to my 60s when I was doing these investigations, and I'm sitting inside of a dark room inside of a house, thinking to myself, okay, where did I go wrong? Okay, somewhere in life I was dropped on my head or something like that. Because
Yeah.
I'm sitting inside of a room talking to an empty room as if there's a spirit here. And there's nobody here. I'm talking to myself in this empty room. What's wrong with me? Okay, what happened to me? But then when you start getting
Yeah.
responses back from it, or you feel it come into the room, there's this old feeling if anyone's ever stood in front of a big walk-in freezer and you open that door and that
Yeah.
blast of cold air that comes at you, okay, if you're sitting there and all of a sudden that blast of cold air comes at you, there's a spirit right around you.
Yeah.
There's something right around. In fact, when Kim Russo did our reading, I told you my grandmother came in. We knew that there were spirits there because we felt that cold feeling right in front of us.
That's amazing.
So when she came for us, I don't know if she had a way of picking up, or those spirits were there catching her
Yeah.
attention. We were the first reading, and I was not expecting the first reading. I literally told Jen, I was like, I didn't even know who she was. Honestly, okay,
Yeah.
I didn't watch Lifetime, so watching that
Yeah.
stuff wasn't for me. And I literally said to her, what I'm going to do is mentally keep track of how many times she says something and the person doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Okay, that it's wrong. And she said to me the name Josephina. And I was like, who? What? Whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
Time out. I
So
was like, who the heck is Josephina? And she says, your grandmother is telling me to ask your mother who Josephina is. She'll know. And I was like, okay, why? She says, because your grandmother is validating that she is there. Okay. And I was like, I think I would have known Josephina. Okay. But okay, fine. No problem.
yeah.
So when we got into the car and we're driving home, it was at the Murat Theater. Okay. So we're driving
Uh-huh.
back and I called my mom in New York. And I was like, all right, I'll explain later. Okay. Because I know she was going to make me explain why. I was like, who's Josephina? And she goes, why? I said, I didn't ask you to answer the question with a question. I was like, who's Josephina? Okay. And she said, that's your grandmother's childhood friend. She says, your grandmother always go to Italy every like 2 or 3 years. Go back and visit. I was like, yeah. She says, well, she stayed at Josephina's house and she was always with Josephina.
Man.
She says, how did you know the name? And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, so you're sitting down? Because I need to explain this to you, okay? How we do Josephina. And the odd thing was Kim actually talked about someone with the letter M. And there was going to be a change of living arrangements. Now, I thought that meant my Aunt Marie, my mom's
Yeah.
sister, and her daughter had already moved out. So I thought that was what it was. And she asked me, she said, when's the last time you saw your mom? It's like about a year ago, because Indiana to Manhattan is a little bit of a drive.
Yeah. Yeah. A
And she
little bit.
said, yeah, she said, I said, well, we were supposed to go down for Thanksgiving, because I still, to this very day, from the time I moved out, I've yet to have Thanksgiving with my family. I've always had it
Yeah.
with my wife's or on our own. And she said, don't put it off. Oh, no. My mom said, no, wait to February because they were coming. No, in June. They were coming in June for a Rockazon gathering, okay, in
Yeah.
Kentucky, the Fort Campbell. And she said, don't travel all the way here. We'll just do that. Costs too much money to come in. I was like, yeah, but no, just wait. And she was
Yeah.
like, don't put it off. Well, obviously, I put it off. My mom died in April.
Uh,
So next time I had seen her, they don't remember the readings they did. They do so many readings, a night, they don't remember. And I was explaining to her about it. And she said, yeah, when I get a message like that, she says, I can't tell you, they're going to die. Her
Yeah.
guides don't tell her that. Her guides basically say, warn him to go in and see them.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I didn't take her advice off of it because I would have seen my mom.
Thank you for joining us for this week's new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week for another great episode with your host Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you are valuable and important. Take time to cherish yourself and those around you. Never forget, your life matters.